This is a presentation of the Sports Source Digital Network, presented by Hearthside Bank.
If a viewer asked us who will be the first to win an SEC title, Josh Heupel, Lane Kiffin, or Billy Napier, what do you think we'd say? Find out next, because that's exactly what one of you did ask. Welcome to the Albert Lounge. This is a lounge modeled after the Carnegie Club, one of my favorite spots in New York City. In terms of modeled after, it's the same wallpaper. We got some nice chairs, though. I'm John Pennington, joined by Jimmy Himes, right over there, who you can find at Full Disclosure Productions. You can still find him. This is a heck of a retirement you've got going on. Full Disclosure Productions, Sports Animal from time to time. I get you on the Sports Source whenever I get a chance to get you. And you're going to be doing some stuff here whenever I can drag you into the Sports Source Digital Network. Jimmy, thanks for being here.
So much for retirement.
There you go. And right here, David Ubben. I'm trying to get you as many times as I can before you, we'll see what your job is. You're with The Athletic, national college football writer. You're always on the rocket ship moving straight up. So we'll see if how much longer I'll be able to grab you in Knoxville.
We tried. I'm sorry I forgot my smoking jacket.
Yeah, no problem. But thanks for coming in and doing it. You do a great job with The Athletic, one of my favorite sites to grab sports news.
Appreciate it.
Thanks to both of you. What we're going to do, on the television show on Sundays, we don't do phone calls. Because basically what that leads itself to is I'll have something planned for segment 4. We do a phone call in segment 1, and someone throws out that topic, and it hijacks the whole show. So we don't do that there. So I thought, well, we got our own new digital network, our own YouTube channel. Why don't we take some of those questions and put them over here? So that's what we're doing, and I fielded a few of your questions earlier this week, and I wanted to throw them out to these guys. We'll see what they don't know what they are. And I realized just before I came out here when I just hit print, some of them printed in the smallest font ever, so this could be a challenge for me to even read these questions, but let's get going. Here we go. Question number 1. I asked everybody to send me your name, so if you want to send us questions in the future, be sure to give me your name and where you're from. But Winston Graves asked the following. Do you think Josh Heupel will eventually have to abandon his scheme? We've already seen pretty noticeable changes in tempo and play calling. 2023 was slow. 2024 was even slower. Screenplays are down. Zone rushing plays are down. Will he change his scheme?
I don't see him changing the scheme. I see him tweaking it. And I think that it's probably needed.
Yeah.
Because I think that, I don't know if defenses have caught up or he has the exact personnel to run what he's doing. He had that personnel in 2022, but the defense since then has declined. So I think he's going to have to tweak it. How much, I don't know, but I think he's going to have to tweak it some.
Well, I think schematically people understand this offense a little bit more, but ultimately it comes down to this offense is built to make sure that if you can win one-on-ones, you're going to be scoring a whole bunch of points. And I think this last year, it was just as simple as they didn't have their players on the outside to win their one-on-ones. Offensive line was okay. It wasn't on the 2022 level, so they weren't able to kind of mash people when they got in conference play as much as they would like. So, I think the scheme, it's people call it a gimmick, whatever. It works. You just have to have
it's a good gimmick.
You just have to have the one-on-ones early in the scheme. People didn't really understand schematically how to slow it down, and you could take advantage of people when you didn't have one-on-ones. But now that they understand it, it's kind of like anything else. Like you got to have the dudes to run it.
We also, a couple of years ago on our show, we had a guy named Justin Hamilton, who was a former defensive coordinator for Virginia Tech, and he's now with the Indianapolis Colts as a defensive backs coach there. But Justin talked famously about the whole offense is set up to make you choose. If you wind up putting so many guys in the box that you want to stop the run, that's going to leave us one-on-one outside, and we're going to beat you there. If you think you're going to stop that over the top, then we're going to run on you. I'm wondering, because I've seen more of this the last year, now that you've got Brent Venables did it this year, and it seemed like most of the teams that had success against Tennessee. Missouri did it last year. Teams will be running this 3-2-5 or put 5 guys in the back, 3-3-5. And what they're doing is they're saying, if you want to run it on us, have at it. We're just going to sit over the top. If you want to run and you think you're going to go 10 plays with as many penalties as you guys commit, and you're going to be eating your own clock by doing that, and I just wonder if teams are choosing as much as they did those first couple of years. It's like, okay, we got to do this, we got to do this. Now they're just kind of sitting back and saying, you're not getting the deep balls over the top. Granted, You didn't have guys who could catch it when you did throw it last year. When you did have guys open, you weren't always accurate in throwing it. But for the most part, that deep ball has gone from this offense since 2022. And talking to some folks who think that, yes, teams and the way they're handling it, there's not much hope for just doing what we do and fixing it. They're going to have to make tweaks because other defenses have spent more time saying, yeah, we know how to defend it now, and we're not going to choose, and we're just going to make you run it, and if you think you can do that, have at it.
Yeah, I think there's a matter of like a counter move. So there's two things. One, like I mentioned before, I think people just underrated how good Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman were. Like they haven't had guys on that level since then. And like Joe Milton's not as good as Hendon Hooker. And I think Nico, they need him to progress into something. But I talked to some defensive coaches, at the middle of this season about Tennessee. And there's a lot. I suspected this going into last offseason, and people were doing it to Tennessee. You talk about the middle of the season when the offense kind of cratered. You make the keys lie to the offense a lot. It looks like a light box, and then you're bringing guys off the edge, and it's not. It looks like there's 5 guys there. Oh, we got enough to block it. Nope, there's 7, and we've got an umbrella over the top, so you can't hit us over the top. And I think teams were doing that over and over and over again, and they didn't have the personnel to beat them, or you don't have a receiver like a Tillman or even Brew McCoy who can catch an 8-yard ball, break a tackle, and make it 40 yards.
Which you didn't see him do that much.
You didn't see him do it a whole lot. Yeah. So I think, I don't think it's like a 30,000-foot issue, but there's like a 10,000-foot issue where you got to get better players, and you're going to have to work on some tweaks when those keys lie to you.
Jimmy, I always wondered about a coach, once you take them out of their comfort zone. You can have a great comfort zone. And Josh Heupel's comfort zone, you saw it. When it's rolling, it's fantastic. But does a guy have a counterpunch? And I don't see him bringing in a lot of new blood for his staff. I don't see a lot of new ideas coming in. I wonder if he's just one of those guys who does what he does. Now, Philip Fulmer was a do-what-he-does kind of coach, won a national championship, and is in the Hall of Fame doing it. It's no knock. But the guys like Spurrier, the guys like Saban, those are guys who, I used to do this. Now I've completely flipped it. I don't know that Josh Heupel's that guy yet.
Philip Fulmer stayed with that because he had better players than you did.
Yeah.
And if you have better players than the other guy, you can keep doing that. Eventually it caught up. Mm-hmm. I think with Josh Heupel, as good as they were in 2022, there was still one team that they couldn't beat, and that was Georgia. Why? Because Georgia, to your point, David,
great athlete, yeah.
You couldn't beat them one-on-one. Yeah. They were that good, and so they shut you down. I do this thing every year for Lindy's Magazine where I call some SEC coaches, and I get their take on all the schools, and I keep it anonymous so they will be honest with their opinion. And I asked one of them, I said, do you think defenses have caught up with Tennessee and Josh Heupel? He said, not as long as Josh Heupel is there. They will not catch up to him. I thought, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, the last 2 years, who's led the SEC in rushing? Tennessee.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which offense has not been as productive as it was in 2022? Tennessee.
Yeah.
So is it that important to lead the SEC in rushing? Maybe you need to lead it in passing. Still have a good running attack, but is that part of the equation as to why Tennessee's not been as efficient? Is their passing game has not been nearly as good
that's where
as
the
it
drop
was 2 years ago?
Yeah. It's the big plays. It's basically the deep balls is what's disappeared. Mm-hmm. It's the deep balls.
And some of them are missed passes and some of them are drops.
Yeah.
But whatever it is, they're not getting as many explosive
And I don't know
plays.
that you're throwing as many as you did either. I don't know if you're one other thing you're not seeing as much of when you had Hyatt. How many times did they move him around to put him on the guy? Here's your weak spot in the secondary. Yeah. We're putting Hyatt there. You didn't see that. Whereas you go to the game in Columbus, Chip Kelly was moving his guys around. There was constant motion. He was taking advantage of you. I don't see Tennessee dictating to the defense as much as they did when they were initially here.
Here's the thing they also do with Hyatt. They would stack him behind another receiver.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then they would run routes off of that and make the defense declare and figure it out. And Alabama couldn't, right?
Yeah.
So they made it harder, I thought, for a defense to defend them.
Yeah. David, let me ask you this. When Josh Heupel got this job, and it's 4 years ago, so I don't think I'm giving away anything here, but you had talked to some coaches, and the feeling was, well, he learned that offense, but it's not really his offense. Mm-hmm. Could that be a little of, he knows the basics, but when this isn't working, he's going to be at more of a loss than, say, Art Briles, who created the thing. Is that a fair assessment of what those coaches told you 4 years ago?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this is Art Browse's offense. He was running it back at Stephenville High in the middle of nowhere, Texas, winning state championships every single year.
With Brandon Stewart.
Yeah, all those guys
That's
a million years ago. That was 20-something years ago before he even went to Houston or Baylor or even walked into college. So, like, it's his offense. You can if you look at all the teams, there's like a dozen running it in college football. Tennessee runs like the purest version of it. Why is that? I mean, I don't know. You can ask multiple people. They might get different answers. All I know is they have the fewest tweaks off of it. Yeah. Now, when Alex Golesh was here, he was a hugely responsible for how they use the tight ends. Interesting stuff in the red zone. Since he has left, seems like they've had some red zone issues. I wonder how much of that, because once you do get in the red zone, well, the deep ball threat's not there.
That's right.
You got to get creative. You got to figure out what you're doing with the tight ends. Art Browse is really good at that. Alex Golesh brought some of that, some ingenuity. I don't think we've seen as much of that. And they've got good players. Kitzelman, Stays, those were good tight ends. So.
Well, I mean, perfect example of that. Go back to what they did with Princeton Fant 2 years ago.
Yeah.
He would run it, he would throw it, he would catch it. They used him in every single way. How much did you see of that last year from Kitzelman and Stays disappeared? That's why he's transferring back out. You just didn't see as much creativity at that one spot, so that's a good point. All right, let's move on. I hope Winston's happy with that answer. It was a long one. And then here's one of these that's printed tiny. This is from Jared Carroll. Why doesn't every coach fair catch every kickoff? Many times a receiving team's player is penalized for holding or a block in the back, resulting in a lost yardage. With a fair catch, the ball's on the 25 with no penalty. I'm not sure if there's data on this, but someone somewhere has it. Why don't you just...
Depends on who you got back there. If you got Caleb Downs back there, I want to try and house it every time I can. If you don't have like a big-time threat or a guy that you feel good about having sure hands, maybe not necessarily on kickoffs, but punts as well, like that's one thing. I think the punt, really underrated as a dangerous play that can flip a game on you. But kickoffs, I think it just depends on it's a risk-reward thing. Like if you feel like you got a guy back there who can make it, I mean, that's a game-changing play.
Like Notre Dame against Georgia.
Yeah, exactly. If you got a guy you love back there, then I think you push it a little bit more. If you got a guy that you're just kind of like, well, maybe.
If I had Evan Berry back there, I'm running it back.
Yeah.
If I've got, no offense, Peyton Lewis, who's not real fast, I'm probably fair catching it. So, I think a lot depends on who I've got back there and if I think he's an explosive athlete that can make a big play.
A lot's also going to depend on what becomes of the kickoff and the way they handle it. The NFL went to this new thing that's just almost pointless at this point. If the NCAA, and typically the NCAA kind of follows along with whatever the NFL does, if the NCAA goes down that path, it's going to be a very boring play. So I say more of them should run it out just for a little activity. That thing's awful.
And there's always the juggling match. Like Jeremy Pruitt talked a lot about this of how much do you want your starters on special teams?
Yeah.
Like the Saban thing was we're going to put our best players back there because we can change the game. That's a third of the game. I think that's generally a minority opinion in the sport because there's more injuries on special teams plays. But again, if you've got guys back there and you think you can make a game-changing play, give it a shot. So it just depends.
All right, next one. Edward Greif. I'll handle this one. I love this one.
Right.
As a longtime journalist for over 40 years, I learned there were other sports to cover. On the Sports Source, all you talk about is football and basketball. There are fans of other UT sports: Lady Vols basketball, softball, baseball, tennis, volleyball, soccer, cross country, golf, swimming and diving, rowing and track and field. Will those things be discussed on the digital network and on the Sunday show in the future? Digital network? Maybe. Sunday show? No. It's a business. And for as much as there are some people who are interested in the cross country team, there are. Not enough to keep my TV ratings up. People will always watch. Well, I'll do it to you. I'll break it down very simply. How many people can you sit at Neyland Stadium? 100,000. Basketball, 20 to 25,000. Baseball, building a bigger stadium, 7,000? Okay, that should tell you how many people out there are interested in a given sport. That does not mean that these people don't deserve more coverage, and I'll be happy to give them coverage if UT wants to pay me to do that. But until I start receiving a check from UT, well, somebody else should cover them. We run a business, so that's one that I always get a lot of. It's like, why don't you talk about this or that? Well, it's pretty simple. It's what we get the viewers with. And I have people that argue that with me. It's like, no, you just don't like this. It's like, well, if it got ratings and made me money, don't you think I'd cover it? I'd cover Vol checkers if it made money, but Vol football is king. Cross country, rowing, diving, I salute all those athletes, but not going to get. I've always gotten a comparison too. They always bring up, well, Jimmy and John did it on Sports Talk.
4-hour show,
20
for
hours
25 years.
Yeah.
4 hours a day.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had an opportunity to mention other sports.
Yeah.
And
I got 90 minutes versus 20 hours.
yeah, and so I didn't spend as much time on cross country, finished second in the SEC. Okay, and then you move on to other things. So yeah, that's not a fair comparison.
You guys have been to this town longer than I have, so I'm curious. My wife's late grandmother, huge Lady Vols person, watched all the games, paid a lot of attention.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, from a media perspective, you know, women's basketball is as popular as it's ever been right now, but Tennessee has not been anywhere close to the top of the sport in, like, 20 years, 15 years, something like that, where, like, there's always, like, 5 or 6 teams that can win it. Some years there's 1 or 2.
It's gotten a little better than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, but Tennessee has not been in that group for a long time.
Yep.
Now,
15 years is right.
now they're obviously fun. We'll see kind of, where that goes. This has been the best season, the best start they've had in a while. They've mellowed out a little bit lately.
Yeah.
But if they can get to that level, where do you think the Lady Vols place would be, like, in the conversation around the city? Like, when they were hot, how much did people, like, embrace them here? Because I think there's a sect of fans. It's like, I lived in Dallas for a long time. It's like Dallas Stars fans.
Yeah.
You never heard from them, but the stadium was packed out every time they played. There was, like, a sect of them that, like, were deeply engaged.
Yes, and I think you will see Thompson Bowling sold out, and nobody's giving away tickets. It's literal sellout. You will have more people talking about it, but it will never, that's the thing, it's never going to rival UT football. If I'm talking Tennessee football on my show and I go to men's basketball, I'm going to have a smaller audience than football. It is what it is. And that's with Tennessee basketball being at its best spot ever. Women's basketball is a drop down from that. Baseball is even more of a drop down from that. Not to give away company secrets, but you talk to the radio stations in town. It's kind of the same thing. There are people who post clips, and this is not a knock on baseball. Well, here's an example. I'm a soccer fan. There's a Liverpool jersey right up there. Huge Liverpool fan. I would love to talk Liverpool soccer on my Sunday show. It's a niche sport. I know I can't. But the number of soccer people who don't view it that way, why don't you ever talk about this? They don't understand. I know you love it, and I know there are other people who fill the stadium who love it, but it's not 100,000. It's not people watching on television the way they do. The women's basketball ratings, I saw a breakdown after it was through December. And with Caitlin Clark no longer playing college basketball, the women's college basketball ratings are down again. Doesn't mean it's a bad sport, just means there are certain things that catch people's attention. If the Lady Vols are winning here, people are going to jump all over it, the same way they did the baseball team. Softball, when Monica Abbott was here, Jimmy, you remember this? When it was suddenly softball was a big thing. People were talking about it, but it still never rivaled football. I think that the latter remains the same. It's just how much of that is filled up to that point. When the Lady Vols are down, their max is still here. The max doesn't change. It's just people may be into it or out of it, but it's never going to rise above its level, if that makes sense.
It's interesting.
Or baseball or whatever. I just
were
think
having a conversation.
They're tiered where they're tiered.
We were having a conversation on my podcast earlier today about $22.1 million for the championship game on Monday night. It's not 12% lower. We're kind of talking about the reasons why. I mean, I think it comes down to, there's a lot of reasons, I think, but the biggest one to me is star power. What was the biggest storyline of the playoffs? It's probably Ryan Day, right?
Yeah.
Your aunt doesn't know who Ryan Day is.
Right.
Your mom doesn't text you about, like, I love Ryan Day. Like, the sport of college football in general has had a few breakthrough stars. You look at, like, Johnny Football, Tebow, Dion. We're just, like, everyone knows who these people are and has an opinion about them.
Caitlin Clark and women's basketball.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that'll be interesting, like, if Tennessee basketball or the women's team gets, like, a star like that, maybe not to the Caitlin Clark level, but like a Paige Beckers or like a Juju Lewis.
Candace Parker.
Yeah, exactly. Like Candace Parker, Shamika Holzclaw. Like people that, like, only pay sort of marginal attention to them. That's what know who those people are. And I think so much of this is pushed by the star power of every sport, I think, and ratings point to that, of people that know who someone is and care about them and have an opinion about them one way or the other.
You could argue in the last few years that Tennessee baseball is more popular than the Lady Vols in basketball.
Yeah.
With the national championship, with the interest, with the calls that you got to sports talk shows and so forth. With the Lady Vols, they rarely ever outdrew the men. I think there were a couple of years where they outdrew the men, even when the men were struggling, and they never made money.
That would have been the O'Neal and Peterson years, I would think.
Yeah,
when you had to be really low in men's basketball.
That's right, and so you had some where the Lady Vols would outdraw them. And I'll say this too, in those time frames when the men weren't that good, the Lady Vols fans were very passionate.
Yeah.
And you would hear a lot from them, which is fine, and you would have a huge attendance number. One year they averaged about 15,000, and that was without giving away tickets. That's pretty darn good.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
And that was one of the rare years they actually outdrew the men in attendance.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Fall baseball, for example, the ratings for their games are fantastic. People are showing up. People are watching on television when they're on television. People are listening on radio when they're on radio. What they're not ready for yet, judging by the television ratings I get on the Sports Source, the people who do TV shows about baseball right now, the people who do radio shows about baseball right now, everybody I've talked to, they're not ready to listen to somebody who should be batting in the 3-hole.
Yeah. We're just like, we want this team to win. I'm not ready to yell at you about our rates.
Exactly.
Rotation.
And now look, if I asked you this on the television show a few months ago when Tennessee won this thing, LSU, have they always had that passion about it because they care about baseball down there?
No.
And it's when Bertman won, 3 and 4 years or something, he won a bunch of championships. And I just wonder if Vitello goes on a run here, and you're talking about you've won 4 of the last 8 national championships, does that get people to the point of now they're calling in and they're wanting to talk about and they're wanting to listen to other people talk about, boy, should they have lifted the relief pitcher there, that kind of stuff. Yeah. Because right now they'll watch it, but they're not to that level.
Yeah, I think it's true.
Well, little known fact, I actually walked on for baseball at LSU.
Interesting.
Didn't last long, but I did walk on. I went to cover some baseball games when I was working at the Baton Rouge Morning Advocate, and there was a game where I actually counted the attendance. It was less than 100. Yeah. And when I put that in my article, the newspaper took it out because they didn't want to embarrass the baseball program.
LSU. Yeah.
But that's how bad it was. And when they hired Bertman, he went around to every civic club. He went to speak to people. He gave away tickets, jerseys, hats, whatever he could. He was a master promoter.
Bruce Pearl.
And yes. And then he won. And he won big. And I had people that told me that if baseball at LSU ever won, that people would show up in droves. And I thought, you're crazy. I was wrong. They did show up, and they became a hot topic and a hot ticket. And then they did away with Alex Box Stadium, the old one, built a new one, and 11,000, 12,000 people show up for their game.
Yeah, I think baseball is clearly, you've won a national championship, people are going to laugh at this, but they're on the right path. Not in terms of on the field stuff, but in terms of becoming a bigger story in this town. But it's right now you just don't have people tuning in for the pre and post game shows as much as they tune in for the games, if that makes sense. And you look at some of these other programs, why did Tennessee and UConn why is Storrs, Connecticut, and Knoxville, Tennessee, why are they such hotbeds for women's basketball? Because they won.
A bunch of games and a bunch of
LSU
titles.
got interested when they won. That's it. If Tennessee got good at rowing, we win the national championship in rowing every year, and somebody put it on TV, you'd start to have people that were rowing fans. So part of it is just winning. But in terms to answer that question, not going to cover much of it on the television show on Sunday mornings on WATE. You can watch it on YouTube on our other YouTube channel. Not going to do much of it there simply because I lose ratings. You turn off. You might not, Edward, but other people do. And here's the interesting thing. I have, and this makes Lady Vol fans mad, but there have been instances where, and this is where in television, when somebody flips, they're gone. You lose them. They're not coming back. On my show, you can track the numbers, with the meters by time periods, and you can look and see that literally people will see us go to a Lady Vols topic. They turn away. Our ratings drop. Then I go back to football later on. Our numbers come back. It's almost like people are sitting there at home going, what else is on here? Oh, he's still talking Lady Vols. Flip around. Oh, now he's football again. So how am I going to program my show if that's the case? Obviously, I'm going to cater to football, then men's basketball, and then Lady Vols and baseball kind of bring up the rear, and softball would be in there too when they're winning a championship. But it's always going to be driven by football simply because that's where the audience is.
So
and
that's where Terry Bradshaw, right?
Yeah, and that's where do you think Tennessee's donations come from?
Yeah,
football, men's basketball, women's basketball. That's just the way it goes. Okay, Let me ask one more question here before we take a quick break. Marianne from Harrogate asks, I like this one. I teased this one earlier. If you had put money on one coach and one program, if you had to put money on one coach and one program right now, who will win an SEC championship first? Billy Napier at Florida, Josh Heupel at Tennessee, or Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss? Thank you, Marianne. I should steal that for the Sunday show. Jimmy, who wins it?
It's not Billy Napier, so I'm going to rule that one out, even though there's incredible resources at Florida. He did finish well. Where did he start? So, yeah, I'm going to rule that one out. Gosh, I'm going to say Lane Kiffin. And it's not easy to win at Ole Miss, right?
Yeah.
But look what he has done with that program. They've won 10 games 2 years in a row. He's able to attract people in the transfer portal. Their players are successful immediately in the transfer portal. He's getting outstanding quarterback play. I think it's – and look at last year. Who gave Georgia their worst whipping last year? It was Ole Miss. Mm-hmm. So I think it's going to be Lane Kiffin.
You made a really interesting line there, a little interesting point with his transfers play well immediately. Mm-hmm. You don't see that here typically.
No.
Weird dynamic.
It's interesting.
Weird dynamic here with that. I don't know. I would vote Lane Kiffin as well, just because I think games are won on the line of scrimmage, and their teams have been just more and more and more physical. And they'll have to reboot a little bit on the defensive line this year.
Yeah.
But they seem to understand that. Like that team, for as flashy as Lane is, teams are built from the inside out. Like you saw, I think it was in like November, like Nick Saban on game day talking about like, I think the best team in the SEC right now is Ole Miss because of the way they were playing on the lines of scrimmage. I generally hold Nick Saban's opinions in higher regard than most football people.
Pretty good. Yeah.
And like, I think to me that's where it stands out because they do have all the skill position talent. Mm-hmm. And what they did this year, they did all that despite losing Quinshon Judkins, who's a pretty good player. Yeah. Last I saw him, he's won 3 touchdowns in the national championship game. And Ole Miss still almost got to Atlanta. So
in biker shorts.
I think, the NCAA rules are that's the one NCAA rule, or I guess who sets those rules? They don't really.
That was the craziest thing I've ever. We're getting it way off. I'm getting it way off topic here, but that actually bothered me the other day watching that. It's like
that's the trend now.
I understand that it's not going to the knee anymore. Yeah. That guy had on bicycle shorts.
The rules committee puts it on the lap of the coaches.
Yeah.
So they don't have that rule anymore. The coaches, you need to make them wear pads.
His pants were so short they barely covered his lap.
Yeah, they can't. That's the thing for now, at least, until we have something resembling a CBA. They can't fine them, so you can't do anything about it.
There's just no rules on anything anymore.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, I want to say thanks. We got more questions to come, but just quickly, thanks to Hearthside Bank. Located in South, they got branches all over Southeast Kentucky and East Tennessee, including in Knoxville at the Farragut branch here. Great place to bank and very personal. If you're looking for personalized banking, I said this in another one of our shows here on the Sports Source Digital Network. There's a bank, an financial institution in town that has recently gone to a monitor wall. No more local tellers. You go and you talk to a teller who's in some room somewhere else. I kind of like a human touch when I'm doing banking, so talking to banking with max headroom does not draw for me. So if you're looking for personalized banking, folks, Hearthside Bank's the way to go. Check them out, hearthsidebank.com. All right, let's get back into the questions. Russ Smith asks, just curious about your thoughts. I understand there are a lot of variables, but I wondered if you thought UT would ever consider and or even contact Bruce Pearl when Rick Barnes retires. And he goes on and says, if you got a last-minute poll, put that in there. He says, the UT fan base seems to have strong feelings one way or the other about Bruce, and I dare say that the people, we had a poll on Sunday talking about it, but he's wondering, would Tennessee consider talking to Bruce Pearl when Rick Barnes retires?
Here's what I would say to that. 2 things. First,
no. That's what I'm going to say to that.
First off, I would say this. Obviously, the winning speaks for itself.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'd be yes or no, but I do know this. Number one, the public view of NCAA rule breakers has changed a lot since Bruce Pearl's been. The last person who was truly villainized was probably Nevin Shapiro at Miami. Everyone else since people just get mad at the NCAA. That's like, this is stupid that these guys are getting all this stuff, and like it's dumb that you guys are policing kids in college getting $1,500.
Most schools do that though. Most fan bases always view if your coach breaks a rule, it's the NCAA's fault.
But I think the general public sees it that way.
Unless the coach sucks, like Jeremy Pruitt, then you blame him.
Then it's like we have an institutional problem.
Yeah, we gotta get
Two, Tennessee has made sort of the school business of flipping the middle finger to the NCAA the last couple years. So if anybody's gonna do it, we'll see where they get to. I would lean probably no, but I think for those two reasons, like the stuff that he did was like nobody cares about that now, and two, I think they might like to stick it to the NCAA again and ask him to do something about it and say we'll see you in court.
Let me just say this: Bruce Pearl did not get fired over barbecue. That's a bunch of bull. Tennessee was going to stand by him, and they said repeatedly they would. And what happened was there were 3 instances after that. So he lied about Brian Williams having a back injury when it was a positive drug test.
There was a bump rule somewhere.
There was a bump rule, and also they gave too many tickets to Scotty Hobson and his family. The third, it's like, what are you doing here?
Too many tickets.
Okay, yeah. So
those were the rules of the
I
day.
know, but that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't think
you shouldn't have jaywalked. Yeah. But yet he kept doing things after that, so that's what got him fired. So that's one. Secondly, Danny White likes to make what? Splash hires.
That's correct.
Would that be a splash hire? If you brought
Splashy as it gets.
Yes. And this kind of surprised me. So I'm interviewing Bruce Pearl at the SEC spring meetings this past spring.
Yeah, listen up, Auburn fans. You'll love this.
Yes. And I said, I talked to him about what a great job he did of getting the students involved, the fans involved, selling it out. And he said, yeah, I did the same thing I did at Tennessee. And oh, by the way, I should still be at Tennessee. Wow.
Sounds like he's really happy on the Plains.
So he's our all-time winningest coach on the Plains,
and
but he's
very
still
happy.
saying I should still be at Tennessee. So I wouldn't go down that road, but I don't know Danny White's thinking on it. Yeah. Here's the thing, too. You just had this awful issue with Jeremy Pruitt and the NCAA, right? Okay. Now, Bruce Pearl, to our knowledge, hadn't done a whole lot at Auburn.
Mm-hmm. Aside from the assistant coach who went to federal prison?
Yes, other than that one. So, but I just wonder how Tennessee's administration would look at that. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a no for a couple of reasons. It has nothing to do with what I would do. I don't think they would do it because, one, you definitely have some people around here who would want it.
Yeah,
definitely.
For sure.
You'd have a whole bunch. I think we did a poll Sunday, which was, it was this past Sunday.
Right.
It was, do you pull for Bruce in every game except when he plays Tennessee? Do you pull for Bruce in every game, period? And there was about 5% said yes, even against Tennessee. And then there was, I pull for Bruce Pearl 100% never. And that was like 60% of the 62% of the answer. So the bigger chunk there is you'd have some people that would want him back. You'd have some people who would be passionately want him back. You'd have a bigger group, I think, that would say, no, we don't want that back. And I don't think Danny White would go there. Why pick a scab when you don't need to? But the bigger reason I don't think he would do it, when has Danny White gone and made that kind of hire? I think Danny White likes to go and find the up-and-comer who's a little cheaper, and he likes to find a guy who's got his own system. Now, Pearl has his own system. I just don't see that one happening. I think that would split the fan base, and there's no need to. I think Danny White's on such a heater with hiring coaches. I don't think he would feel he would need to do that.
I will say,
but we'll see. That means it'll happen tomorrow.
Yeah, the other thing,
when Barnes retires.
Coming back is, we just look. Mac Brown just finished at UNC. Rich Rodriguez back to West Virginia.
Yeah.
Listen, if Bobby Petrino can get a job back at Louisville and back at Arkansas, never say never.
Well, just go hire Dan Hurley at Connecticut because he's the best coach in the country.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, here's the next one. I think Danny White is doing a great job, and I agree people care more about football than all the other sports. Get that. My question is, Rick Barnes can't coach forever. Do you think Danny will hire his brother as the next basketball coach once Barnes retires? I do not see that one.
Yeah, I don't think that's going down.
I think he'll find some up and comer with his own system. I'll throw out a name that's, he walked in the Division II. Now here's a guy who Pearl. If you go look this guy up on the websites, they all have quotes from other coaches when they're hired. Bruce Pearl goes nuts over this guy, Josh Schertz, who was at LMU for a long time ago, and many years ago, before Tennessee hired Rick Barnes, we did a list of like 20 guys on the Sports Source. And I put Josh Schertz's name on there when he was at LMU. I said, guys, I know you're going to laugh, but Ray Mears came from Wittenberg. Okay. Bruce Pearl came from Southern Indiana at one point. Some of these guys can rise up from the bottom ranks and come up. Josh Schertz is a guy he plays 5-out basketball. He went to Indiana State and immediately turned them around, had the best year since Larry Bird. He then got a job at St. Louis, where he is this year in his first year. I'm not saying it'll be Josh Schertz, although he does have some regional ties here. But I think it would be someone of that ilk. When you look, Danny White is a guy who hired Nate Oates and Lance Leipold when he was at Buffalo.
Right.
He's hired Heupel at UCF and here. Now Kim Caldwell. We predicted that the Sunday that they were going to make a hire. I said on the show, watch Kim Caldwell. And the response was like, who the hell is Kim Caldwell? It's like,
That's what I thought.
she plays 100 miles an hour and shoots all kinds of threes. That's up his alley, and that's exactly where he went. So I don't think he would look at his brother. I don't think he'd look at Bruce Pearl. I think he'd look at another. I think he's got the Midas touch, and he knows it.
John Schwartz he would have the support of Pete DeBus, too.
Yeah, that's
Pete loves him.
I will say, though, I was watching
John,
the first season of Friday Night Lights, of which Rick Barnes makes an appearance. He looks like the exact same. He might be immortal. I don't know that you can rule that out. He looks the same he did 25 years ago. So aging gracefully, Rick Barnes.
There we go. And just on the side note, everybody talking about replacing Rick Barnes. I think that'll be a bad day for UT because here's the thing: you would have to immediately. Do you have any concerns about where this program is year after year with him? I mean, he's got it to a point now where you know you're going to be pretty darn good.
Yeah.
Are you Elite Eight good? Are you Final Four is still the bugaboo, but are you Elite Eight good? Are you Sweet 16 good? How much are you going to compete for the SEC title? It's kind of an every year thing, and now he's recruiting like a madman too. So I just think that in terms of the transfer portal, he's making hit after hit is what I mean.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see
Linear.
if that's like his new thing. The Connect Linear, who's the next one. If you're if you're sitting there in the Southland Conference putting up 40 a game, call Rick Barnes.
Here's one. We got two more. Eddie Torino of Murfreesboro. I like that name, Eddie Torino. I hope his friends call him Gran. Does Tennessee have the NIL dollars to match the bluest of the blue blood programs? If so, why aren't we signing the bluest of the blue blood signing classes? You broke the big first story at The Athletic about collectives, and it happened to be Spire Sports here, and everyone I remember on our show were like, what's a collective? And you were kind of the answer man. You did all the national talk shows and everything. Fans here thought, oh, man, with Tennessee's passion, with money, we're going to blow everybody away with the NIL level. And now you look, and a lot of other people have caught up. And you've got people like Ole Miss who we don't have the same amount of money to spend with high school kids, but we'll throw a ton of money at the portal. Texas Tech this year, out of nowhere, found some oil money and started throwing. Yeah, Ohio State. They watched Michigan win a national championship last year. They go out and buy a $20 million team. Now, part of that is guys they already had on campus, but then they put a lot into transfer portal. Does Tennessee, where do they rank in terms of the national perspective, and that's what you bring, where do they rank in terms of other schools with their NIL? And if it's equal to others, why isn't Tennessee signing top 5 classes? They're top 10 last 2 years. That's great. But when you look at the Ohio States of the world, they're top 5 every year. Alabama and Georgia, when they were winning it, top 5 every year. That's where you kind of need to be, unless you do the Michigan thing where, oh my goodness, it worked around to where we got a veteran team.
Yeah.
It's all worked, and this is our one roll of the dice.
They're the anomaly in all
this. Yes, exactly.
Tennessee is, doing well, but they're not at the tippy top. They were an early adopter, obviously, but I think in some of the discussion we had after that, I said, Tennessee's ahead of the game here. People are going to catch up, and then we got to figure out, okay, what happens then? So, a lot of discussion about the $20 million number. You talk to people in the business, it's at or near. Ohio State wasn't necessarily the biggest spender. They were up there. 20 is generally considered what's the difference between 20 and 22 million? It's
maybe beating Michigan.
Maybe, maybe. Yeah, exactly. Well, maybe $3 more million on the game plan are there. But ultimately, the biggest spenders are still Oregon. Notre Dame isn't as loud about it. Notre Dame's right up there too. And you look at the top 10 last year, I'd bet you 7 of the top 10 were among that. Now, that's not necessarily a have to. You can sort of hack your way to it. But Tennessee's not at the tippy top. They're doing quite well. But I did a story on Ole Miss this year, talked to their Walker Jones, who runs their collective, and their number was 12.5.
Yeah.
So again, a lot of it is you need to have the money to fund it, but it's still assessment, evaluation, recruitment. Relationships still do matter.
Yeah.
Building your roster. in a way that makes sense. Keeping your locker room, is solid is very difficult, especially now when you have so many transient guys. You need a strong central leadership. Yeah. So Tennessee's not at the top, but they're in a place where they can be competitive. But there's so many other variables to getting to hoist the trophy.
What is Tennessee's number? If Ole Miss is at 12.5 million,
so schools are very protected. So I actually worked on a story about this heading into the playoff. I called all the collectives going into championship weekend and badgered their leadership. Tell me, you got to be a little creative to get it. But Iowa State told me that they spent about $3 million. Indiana and Arizona State wouldn't give me exact numbers, but they said we're about $6 million or 6 times what we did the previous year. My guess was $7-ish million for those schools.
Yeah.
Ohio State famously at 20. You talk to people, you hear numbers that aren't necessarily for public consumption that you kind of hear. But
this is just between us.
Exactly. I will say Georgia and Alabama are behind. They are behind, and I think you saw that on their roster. I think for a long time Alabama
not behind Tennessee.
They're close. It's very close.
Okay, now that's.
The question is, so Alabama has leftovers.
Then that makes you question how well Tennessee's really recruiting.
Well, but
if they got more.
So the issue with
more
that,
in Alabama and Georgia, and their classes aren't as good as Alabama and Georgia, that's an issue.
The issue with that is, so Alabama for a long time, the Saban discount was real.
Right. Yeah.
And you could get that, and then you have this turnover. Alabama's still recruiting at a killer level, and I think they may have figured out this last year. We need to up our dollars. Georgia, I think, believes the Kirby discount is real. I don't think it actually is real. They lost out on Caleb Downs. Everyone assumed when they left, well, Caleb Downs, his position coach, came to Georgia. They just assumed we got him, and they offered money. Didn't get him. Yeah. He went to the national champions. And then you look at Georgia, you watch them play, they did not have the level of dudes that they've had previously.
That's correct. Now, I wonder how much of that, too, though, is they've lost a lot of guys early.
That's part of the collective, too. You got to keep your guys. Now, if they're first rounders, they're first rounders.
Right.
But the biggest reason why people talk about this money for Ohio State, Trayvon Henderson stayed. Jack Sawyer, who won them that Texas game, stayed. JT Tuimoloau, he stayed. All these guys stayed. The only big additions they only added 3 real starters from the portal. It's Will Howard, the quarterback, Quinshon Judkins, and I forget Caleb Downs. The rest of them were pretty much holdovers. They had a really mature team. They were
the
more
center was pretty good, McLaughlin.
Yeah, McLaughlin came over
from Alabama.
They were more like that down on our television show that everybody thought, well, they went out and bought a team.
Yeah.
No, it's much more money that had been invested in guys that have been there for 4 and 5 years.
Yes, they were more like Michigan than Ole Miss in terms of bringing guys in.
Yeah, their defense was a bunch of 4th and 5th year starters.
So did Tennessee spend more than Ole Miss?
I mean, so
you coach up and you avoided the question.
I'll say this. I called everyone. I reached out to everyone. I talked to 8-ish, 9-ish, 6 on the record. Yeah. I didn't hear back from Spire.
Which, it's an interesting switch from where they were a couple years ago, too.
It's true.
I think UT might have told them, would you zip it over there?
I got a text.
Quit talking to that guy.
I got a text back, and then I asked, hey, do you guys have time to talk? And then I never got a response.
And what you're talking about, when we're talking about the Saban discount, the Smart discount, it's basically, there are some programs where the players say, I will take less because you guys are basically a factory to the NFL.
Yeah, you're going to make me a first-round pick.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. So I'm surprised that Georgia isn't getting – you don't believe that that's real for Georgia.
Yeah, because I think they weren't as hungry. You look at the places that were the biggest spenders early. Oregon, Tennessee, Texas A&M. They all have in common proud history, want to get over the top. Yeah. This money can help us do that. They've had varying levels of success. Tennessee kind of in the middle. Oregon the best in terms of spending money and sort of upping their status. A&M – they had a Jimbo problem. We'll see where they go from there, but,
Jimmy, let me ask you this one. I can't remember were you on the show this past Sunday?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think I asked you this, but maybe I did. Is there any concern? You look at Tennessee, and they're successful in baseball. They're getting back in basketball with Lady Vols. They spend on men's basketball, spend on football. There are some schools, they spend on their football program. Mm-hmm. How much money? All right, Ole Miss is spending $12.5 million on football. What do you think they're spending on their roster for Chris Beard? What are they spending on women's basketball? What are they spending on baseball? I don't know. LSU probably spends more on baseball than other baseball programs. But do you think there's any drawback? Do you think it's possible that Tennessee could be having to say, look, we've got $20 million here. Damn it, we got to give $1 million to this group, and we got to give $1 million over here. Whereas you got less for football because you are winning across the board. Do you think that's within the realm of possibility or no?
Well, within the realm of possibility, I'd say yes. Do I think it's going on? Probably not, because I don't think they're going to spend money on basketball or baseball or whatever at the expense of football. Because as you mentioned earlier, what drives your show?
Yep.
Football.
What
they
drives
understand
their donations.
football. That's exactly right. And if you look at the $234 million budget that they mentioned, look at how much revenue came from football.
Yeah.
So they understand that. So, I can't say that they've lost a player because they didn't have enough NIL money. I don't know the answer to that.
I don't think that's happened.
That became. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm saying I don't think that's happened. Go ahead for me.
So I don't know the answer to that, but I don't think that they are losing people because of that. And I think there's enough money at Tennessee to get players. One of the things that's hamstringing them right now is a little bit, as far as the portal, going out in the portal right now, they don't have any spots.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
That's hurting them. So people, wow, they only got 3 guys in the portal because they can't bring in 10.
The rev share part of it, I think, will be interesting as we move forward, and like what that means for money, because like,
assuming that gets.
well, it'll be. I mean, that's getting there. It's getting to the finish line.
It'll have to get through Title IX. And
that's
it'll have to get through the first lawsuit saying that's a salary cap. That's not.
more
we
or
didn't
less.
bargain that.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see where that
But
goes.
go ahead.
But
Let's pretend that the revenue sharing's coming.
well, there's gonna be
It'll be
some
something.
element of money,
Yeah.
and I think $20 million will start. The Title IX thing, the Department of Education sends out this thing saying like we're going to enforce Title IX
Yep.
4 days before the administration changes, and then like Ted Cruz comes up and is like, no, we're not going to do that. Actually, we're not going to enforce that. So the schools don't really have to worry about Title IX in terms of the money with the rev
It's still
share.
the law of the land. I guess they could.
But somebody's got to enforce it, and the federal courts are not going to enforce it. So generally, with that $20 million, let's say you have 20, which every school says they're going to have 20, they're not all going to have 20. But it's like 12 to 14 is generally earmarked for football, and the rest of it they'll split it out. So we'll see.
Yeah, I don't naturally trust politicians. If I did, I would have thought
really?
TikTok was going away, and then the next day it's
It did for like 6 hours.
changed their mind. TikTok's back. Okay. Last question here, guys. Roger D. Some of those last names, folks. Let me know where you're from. Roger D. says in 15 seasons, from 81 to 95, the SEC won 1 national championship. I'd forgotten this. I looked it up, and he's right. Between 81 and 95, only Alabama in 92 was a national champion from the SEC. The league then won 3 in 10 years, from 96 to 2005. And then between 2006 and 2022, they won 13 in 17 years. So 1 in 15, 3 out of 10, 13 out of 17. And his question is, which of those is more likely going forward? Because you're 0 of the last 2 now.
Didn't even get to compete for either one.
I think you may get. It's not going to be 13 and 17. I think it's probably going to be more than 3 and 10, less than 13 and 17.
Yeah.
Because I think just by the definition of 12-team playoff, there's more chances to lose and not win the thing. When you had the BCS and you're basically getting every year, it's like, well, you're the SEC, we got to give them 1, and then 1 year they said, yeah, give them 2. You're automatically put in the national championship game. Now you got to earn it, and it's a lot of games you have to win. How many bids do you get? I think going into the season, no one would have thought, oh, yeah, the SEC will only get 3. And there'll be another conference that gets more, and the ACC will be right on their heels with 2. So I think because of that, you're looking at probably 5 and 10 is my guess, 4 and 10.
Maybe something like that.
I was going to say 5 to 8 over a 17-year period.
Okay.
So you're talking about as far as winning national championships.
Yeah.
This is. Go ahead.
One of the things to me about what's happened lately, I think we might agree, Georgia this year was not as good as it had been the previous 3 years. Alabama certainly not as good as it had been typically under Saban. So the question is why? Okay, transfer portal, NIL. So to me, the field is leveled out a lot. Now the SEC is not going to go away, but I don't know that they're going to have the powerhouse teams that they had because they could stockpile talent and build incredible depth. And neither one of those 2 teams, which have been the dominant teams in the SEC over the last, 8 years or so, neither one of them were nearly, to me, were as good as they had been at their best.
Agreed.
I think this is like the most interesting debate to me in college football right now because you listen to Big Ten people, they will say, well, now that all the money's going over the table and our Big Ten schools weren't willing to play ball, like now you're seeing this flip back.
Now programs that have always been clean, like Ohio State,
Exactly.
now they have a shot.
Exactly. So like there might be something to that a little bit. But you look at, okay, well, in terms of pure money, in the North, like you're talking about the city centers in the Big Ten, there's probably more money there than there is in the South.
Much bigger alumni bases.
Yes, bigger alumni bases too. Notre Dame, Michigan, Ohio State are the 3 biggest fan bases in college football. But you look in the South, you look at the talent, 24/7 talent composite, 6 of the top 9 teams are in the SEC, 13 of the top 25. So it really is like it's a Rorschach test. Like you can make the case for either one, and I don't know where it's going to go. I do think we weren't going to see a run like we saw that, but I don't think the SEC is going anywhere either.
No, I don't think it's a drop off. I just think it's going to be. I think it's going to be like in a 10-year period, 4 for the SEC, 4 for the Big Ten, and then 2 for the other conferences and independents.
And think about this: 4 or 5 years ago, would Alabama have lost Caleb Downs to Ohio State?
No, absolutely not. Yeah.
So
that's why it stays.
It's the portal opening it up, and then the NIL can drag you away. But
and Saban leaving certainly could have contributed to that as well. But I think you're seeing some really good players from those 2 programs and other programs moving around to try to find the money and the best fit.
And if you look at, say, 24/7, which you mentioned, if you look at where the 5 stars are going, you look at it, and it's still the same numbers going to the SEC. What's changed with NIL, though, is instead of 4 to Alabama and 4 to Georgia, it's 3 to Alabama, 3 to Georgia, 1 to Ole Miss, 1 to Tennessee, 1 to LSU. So you don't think that's? I mean, that's a 5-star should be a game-changing kind of player.
Right.
So now you take one off these guys, and you put them somewhere else in the league. Okay, any given Saturday, that changes things. Jimmy Himes, David Oven, thanks to both of you guys. I appreciate you coming in here. Thanks to you for watching. You can always send us questions via, SSDNQuestions@gmail.com. You can watch us Sundays at 11 on WATE 6 if you're in the East Tennessee area. You can catch us on our Sports Source YouTube channel. Search for that. Also, you can subscribe right here. If you subscribe here, if you like this, if you click notify, what that's going to do is it's going to help get the word out to other Tennessee fans across the country. When I was growing up in Charlotte as a kid, man, you were cut off. That was pre-internet. I would have killed to be able to get Knoxville-based sports coverage of the Vols when I was a kid. And that's what we do. Help us spread the word by doing all that. And if you think we're crazy, if you disliked all of my answers and you love theirs, you can put that right in the comment section. Pennington, shut up, let the other guys talk. Comment section's down there for a reason. Give us your thoughts, send us questions there if you like to. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time on our Q&A show.